Welcome to another episode of the Spoon Mob Podcast. This week I'm joined by Master Sommelier, Executive Chef, Restaurant Owner, and Winemaker Christopher Bates. If you're not familiar with him, he has his hands in a lot of different things. He does a lot of different stuff. His hospitality group, F.L.X Hospitality, is out in the Finger Lakes part of New York, kind of Geneva, New York area. He has a few different restaurant concepts, also has a winery, is also working on sour beer too as well. But I first learned about Chris really from Chris Dillman, who was on this podcast last year. And that's where Chris Dillman went to work for Chris Bates out at F.L.X Table, which is kind of the fine dining restaurant that he has. Now Chris Dillman's back in Columbus. You know, he wanted to go out there and see what it was like to work and live outside of Columbus for a bit. In the later stages of his career, you know, he didn't want to miss out on that opportunity. So that's something that he did. And, you know, I always wanted to have a Master Somm on this podcast at some point. I've reached out to a few. Some are harder to get in touch with than others. And Chris is kind of local in terms of, you know, only 6 hours away from Columbus, Ohio. So, you know, he was totally down to do it. And we were able to get it set up once he got back from doing some traveling and had just a really cool conversation just about his career. Started out as a chef. You know, we kind of go along the chef timeline of how he first got into food and restaurants and everything, and then where he kind of picked up with wine and getting really into wine and deep diving and opened his own winery with his dad. And then eventually kind of moving back to the Finger Lakes area with his wife and setting up shop and starting to open a bunch of different restaurant concepts and eateries and things like that. So he's got a lot going on. He's a super ambitious dude, really nice guy too as well. He serves on the board of CMS currently too as well, so we talk about that. We also get into a little bit of the controversy with surrounding CMS from a few years back too as well. So, you know, he didn't shy away from any questions that I had and didn't dodge anything. You know, he's open, honest, and gave his opinions, and definitely respect everything that he has to say about it and the organization too as well. So it's a really interesting conversation, a really cool conversation. I was super happy to eventually check off the box of having a Master Somm on the podcast. So you can follow him on a lot of different social media platforms, especially Instagram. His Instagram handle is at Sommelier Bates, but you can follow the restaurant group at F.L.X Hospitality. You can also follow the restaurants individually. So at F.L.X Table is the fine dining restaurant. At F.L.X Winery is the burger and hot dog. That's the first concept that they ever opened. At the Quincy Exchange, which is kind of this bistro restaurant they have. At F.L.X Provisions, which is kind of like this marketplace, a lot of local ingredients and local products too as well that they work with in that business arm. At Element Wines, which is the winery that he opened with his dad and still makes wine to this day. And also his latest kind of project is at F.L.X Culture House, which is sour beer that he's been messing around for a bunch of years. And they've started to bottle some of it and are going to start releasing it and selling it too. And he's got a few more things in the works too as well. The Maillard Club, which is kind of like a steakhouse restaurant. They're working on hiring a bunch of people too as well and getting that off the ground because it's in like a 3-story building with the Quincy Exchange and then also F.L.X Provisions. So they also have a catering operation too as well. So we touch on that. So we go through, you know, everything that falls under the purview of F.L.X Hospitality in this episode. So it's a really cool conversation, but you can follow us on Instagram too as well, at Spoon Mob, Twitter, Facebook. Make sure to follow, subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast from. Feel free to write in any questions, comments, feedback. Either email us directly, spoonmob@yahoo.com, or through the website. There's a little contact portal that you can submit through as well, a little box there on the contact page. But check out the website for contact information for any of our guests, food photos, different links to all the different episodes too you can find there if you're not subscribed with us. But without further delay, here's my conversation with Master Sommelier and owner of F.L.X Hospitality, Christopher Bates. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast. And I know you're a busy guy. You got a lot of stuff going on, the hospitality group and everything. So I first kind of learned about you really from Chris Dillman, who was working at F.L.X Table for a while as the sommelier. You know, he's been a very integral part of the wine scene here in Columbus for a number of years and has mentored and taught a lot of different sommeliers that we have here locally. So, you know, then I kind of started looking into what you were doing. I was like, oh, the food looks really awesome. And it was like, oh, there's all these other properties. And it's like, oh, he's a chef. Oh, Oh, he owns a bunch of restaurants. Oh, he's a sommelier too. Oh, he's a master som too. So started kind of going through the rabbit hole, and I was like, I always wanted to have, a master som on the podcast too as well. We've had a bunch of different people across the levels, but never a master. So you're the first master. But, before we kind of get into all the stuff that you guys got going on now, I always like to start at the beginning of everybody's career. I mean, how did you first kind of get started? I mean, you definitely got started with cooking first.
Yeah. I mean, I started cooking when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up cooking with my mom pretty much nonstop from the time I was, I don't know, a couple of years old, and have done it pretty much my whole life. I started working in restaurants when I was about 14 and then never really looked back from there.
I read something in like an article. It said like when you were 3 was like the first time you ate sushi. Is that correct?
That's a true thing. I was actually out visiting my uncle, took us out to a sushi place. And I remember distinctly, it's really one of my first memories, running around and like begging for sushi off tables. So
was it a sushi roll? What kind of roll was it?
I remember liking the octopus. That's really the most specific I can get. Table was here and I was probably here. So I think I was kind of running around like a little dog, just trying to get sushi from everybody.
Like, that's crazy because just, you grew up in kind of a rural, farming community, right? So finding sushi, I mean, I live here in Columbus, Ohio, and quality sushi is a pretty difficult challenge. And I live in a city, so.
Well, it's funny because back then, even more so, thankfully, we were blessed growing up because we had a Wegmans nearby. Back then, that's really one of the things that led me to cooking was we didn't have availability of a lot of these things. So if I wanted croissants, I had to learn to make them. If I wanted, baguettes, I mean, the Wegmans baguette is nice, but if I wanted something a little bit more artisanal, I had to make it. So, we went back and kept cooking with my mom and learning all that. And then eventually realized that there was no place to get sushi again. So started learning how to make it.
And I think your first job was a dishwasher, right? At 14, working in a restaurant. What made you gravitate towards the back of the house? You're kind of back there, but you're washing dishes, obviously. Is it because you get to see everybody in the kitchen and kind of see what they're doing and stuff, more so than the front of the house?
Yeah, I kind of did both back then. I mean, I didn't grow up in a restaurant per se. I mean, frankly, we didn't really go to restaurants much as a kid. And so when I started working, I knew I liked cooking and I was good at that. Had started to kind of do more and more stuff with food. So working in a restaurant seemed like a natural thing. And, I needed beer money and was trying to save up for a car and all of that stuff. So started working and washing dishes. And eventually I was like, well, I don't really want to keep washing dishes only. And so I wanted to cook. They wouldn't let me. So I started working on the floor, bussing tables, and got to wheel around the little dessert cart for a while. Apparently I was good with people. And so that led me to being still not able to work on the hotline, but I did get to go and start working on the brunch buffet line. So started sauteing on the brunch buffet line and cooking out there, and kind of one thing led to another, and I took another restaurant job and another one, and that's kind of what really got me ingrained in it, and worked between the front and the back of house even back then, and really have just kind of bounced back and forth ever since.
After high school, you wind up going to, I think it's the Cornell Peter and Stephanie Nolan School of Hotel Administration. Why did you enroll there? How did you wind up there versus any, other CIA or any sort of other hospitality school?
I didn't actually ever have any recognition that I was going to do this the rest of my life. And in high school, I did pretty good in school, especially for somebody who never really paid much attention. And so I always anticipated that I'd go to like a real school. And so never really thought much about what I was going to do in my real life. So when I got time to start thinking about colleges, I was looking around and I was kind of bouncing between whether I wanted to go for sports or for cooking or for like real school, smart people school. Kind of bounced back and forth between those two or those three until kind of by chance, I went to visit Cornell with a friend and found out that they were an Ivy League school and had a hospitality program. And so I was like, well, I guess that solves it. I'll do that. I went there so that I could kind of get the best of both worlds. And that was really what cinched the fact that this is what I was going to do for a living and not mathematics or physics or something like that.
Was that like things that you actually seriously considered? I mean, you mentioned sports, math, or physics. Were those things that you were super interested in exploring too?
Yeah, I mean, I used to ski a lot. So I used to do a ski racer. Slalom was kind of something I was considering doing potentially longer than just high school. But, outside of that, it was really math and physics are huge things that I love. I love numbers and hence love spreadsheets today. Yeah, those kind of things just always made sense to me. I'm definitely more of a number person than I am a letter person.
Yeah, I don't really know too many people that ski. Being such like a solo sport, is that a lot like tennis where you're just kind of out on the mountain by yourself? You're working on different aspects of, technical and how far you can push it and all that stuff, but it's really kind of an individual thing, even though like maybe you have a coach, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I decided I wasn't going to pursue that past high school, I really haven't ever skied since. I've probably been 5 times, maybe 10 times since high school, since I decided I wasn't going to pursue that as a career. But really, it was, especially slalom, it's such a simple thing, and it's you perfecting very tiny movements. And I was just writing another version of a manifesto about culinary stuff for my team this morning. So much of what I talk about and I think about is perfecting small things and just doing this one thing precisely and repeatably. And really, skiing was exactly that for me. It's knowing the pattern and then figuring out how to perfectly carve through every single one of those. And I think cooking is a lot of that same thing. It's knowing the pattern, knowing how things work, and then having that technical detail to cut perfectly and how to do those things exactly. I don't know, there might be some parallel there.
So I ask this to pretty much anybody that comes on the podcast with at least a culinary background. If someone in one of your kitchens, one of your restaurants comes up to you, is like, hey, I'm super passionate about becoming a chef, owning a restaurant on my own one day. Do you think I should go to culinary school? What would you tell them?
Fuck no, do not. I mean, frankly, college is what has destroyed our entire generation of people for the most part, and made them slaves to a system that they can't break out of. College is a horrible idea for people. Don't get me wrong. I want my doctor to have gone to college. That's not something I want them to have picked up on the job. But for the most part, this idea that everyone has to go to college to be successful, I think is one of the most amazing marketing things that I've ever seen done, but also one of the worst for people. There are a few things that obviously you're better off going to college for, or that really need that. But for the most part, not everyone should be going to college. And in hospitality, I can't recommend against it enough. Plain and simple, the moment you sign up for college, you will never be able to afford to do the things that you dreamed of doing. You spend all this money to learn how to cook, and then you come out and you can't afford to cook for a living. So it's a really big problem. And it's one of the things that I think has really destroyed our industry in a lot of ways. So no, don't go to college. Take that time and learn from people who do. Take that money and invest it in your own growth. Listen, if you're going to get like the state to pay for everything, or you've got like grants and scholarships and stuff, okay, cool. That's great. But if you're actually considering plunking down either, $100,000 or $200,000 of your money or your parents' money or the bank's money that you're going to have to pay back in the future, frankly, take that money and use it in better ways. Go rent an apartment and work somewhere. Go work for people who want to teach, and go work for people who you want to learn from. Take the opportunity to travel. Go work in Paris for a season. Go work in Norway for a season. Go to San Francisco. Do that. Spend the money that way. And frankly, if you're going to go to an expensive school, a friend of mine reached out because her kid's getting to that age, and she asked about whether I think he should go get him enrolled in the hotel school at Cornell. You spent $250,000 on that. Here's what I want you to think about instead. Buy him a restaurant. Just buy him one today. Just go buy a restaurant. Spend $100,000 on it. Let him tank that restaurant. Tank it. Blow it up. Subsidize the next, 5 years of him going around and learning from other people, and then buy the second restaurant that he can actually do well. There's no better way to learn than in real life. College is not a way for our future. Don't do it. Stop.
And at the same time, for you, when you're in the hospitality school, you're also working at the Statler Hotel, right? How did you wind up there? Was it just they were hiring and you were in the area, or did you know somebody, or how'd that all come together?
Again, I worked all through high school. I probably worked 40 hours a week or more because I was holding down a couple of jobs for a while. And then I got to college and I did the same thing. I mean, didn't have the money, so I had to make the money to live. And I wanted to pay off everything before I got out of college. So I worked probably 40 to 60 hours a week during college. And at Cornell, at the hotel school, there is the Statler Hotel, which is part of the program. And you obviously have to do some work there during your tenure to graduate. But I started working there as a paid person, basically, the moment I got to school. In fact, I went and got the job before I started college.
And this is kind of where you first started getting into wine too, right?
After I graduated high school, before I went to college, I had saved up some money and did a little tour of Europe. When I asked my dad if there's anything he wanted, he asked for a nice bottle of Scotch. So I spent most of my time in Europe searching for a nice bottle of Scotch and got super excited about it and interested in it. Started reading and studying. And probably as an 18-year-old freshman, that was probably a little weird that all I drank was single malts and had a collection of single malts in my dorm room, but hey, whatever. It's who I am. And, from there, my dad picked me up a Wine Spectator one day, thought I might want to read it. And I started to get fascinated by the tasting descriptions and what these wines sounded like. And, compared what I'd started to learn about single malts and their flavors and how they come about, and started reading about wine and going, oh, that sounds interesting. I'd like to know about that. Hey, I want to taste that someday. And that's really what kind of got me started.
Single malt Scotch. I've never been somebody that's gravitated towards Scotch. A couple times I've had it. Am I missing something, or is that common amongst most people where it's just something that most people don't really enjoy? It's an eclectic group, or is it just it takes a while to really appreciate the nuance of it?
So first of all, alcohol triggers our pain sensor, right? It's actually not really a pleasurable thing to consume for most people, especially early on, much in the same way that spice triggers our pain sensor, So you learn to appreciate and to enjoy typically spicier food as you get older and as you experience it and all of those things. So I think alcohol is something that kind of does that inherently. But when we look at, how we get into wine and all of that, most people start out drinking things that are a little easier to understand, maybe a little more fruit forward, a little bit riper, more textured and richer things or sweeter things. And then they transition later on as they learn more and more and start to appreciate, just like most of us didn't start appreciating coffee when we were little. We didn't like that bitterness. We start to like that later on in life. And so I think alcohol is much the same way. Bourbon's such an easy category to get into for people. It's sweet, it's opulent, it's very straightforward and, vanilla-y and caramel-y and all of that, where, Scotch for the most part is much more savory flavors. It's much more kind of subtle, I like to think nuanced flavors that maybe aren't the most appealing early on for folks. So, but usually I think, bourbon's a great way for people to start. And then I think later on, if they're exposed to it, if they make that effort to learn more and taste more Scotch, I think Scotch is something that comes around a little later for a lot of people.
So you're 21 and you take the intro sommelier exam. Was that something you wanted to do? Is that something that just your employer kind of encouraged you to take?
Time of my life's a little fuzzy, but I was working at the hotel school. I was working for an amazing chef there. I basically had focused everything I was doing on food and wine. So I was taking every food class I could. I was taking every wine class I could. And I really wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to anything other than those things and my work. And so I had seen something about sommelier competition. So there was the Best Sommelier in America competition I saw advertised in some magazine. What was that magazine back in the day? Food Arts, I think. Great old school magazine. I decided I would sign up for this as a college student. I thought I would try to be the best sommelier in America. And I got accepted into the competition. And then I became terrified about the fact that I was taking this competition, which in fact included cigars, which I'd never smoked anything in my entire life. And I was like, ooh, fuck, cigars are on this? So with about a month's notice, I dove into cigars and started smoking 4 cigars a day. Also, probably a weird thing for a sophomore in college to be doing or a junior in college to be doing. And was just like, okay, I'm going to learn everything about this. And then took my intro along with that. I saw that program and I was like, all right, I want to do that. So kind of all of it just sort of came together. And it was the chef I was working with at the time had thought I was crazy, but encouraged me to do all of those things. And it was what I loved. And I'm a little competitive and I like doing those things.
I was trying to piece all this together, but I think after you graduate, you wind up going to Italy and opening your own restaurant.
Ran a little place in Wisconsin for a summer and then spent some time in Chicago. And I wanted to learn more about wine making, and specifically how winemakers really taste wine. And so I was looking for a place to work in Germany. I really wanted to work in the Mosel, as those were and still are some of my favorite wines in the entire world. So I was looking for a place in the Mosel, and everybody kept saying, no, you can't do it. We won't. You're not strong enough. You're not tough enough. You can't handle it. We only hire Polish people. Like, you can't do it. Finally, somebody was like, sure, we'll hire you. And so I put in my notice and started making plans. And then I never heard from them again. A friend of mine had in Italy who had a winery. And so I can connect you with them. So sure, contacted them. They said I could come for harvest. So I changed my plans. And then like the next day I heard from the German folks and they were like, yeah, you're still coming, right? So I went and did harvest in Italy. Worked, the 4 or 5 weeks of harvest straight, and then got on the train the day harvest ended and moved up to Germany and did another harvest there. Met my wife, and then we decided to, I've been looking for an opportunity in Italy, and somebody called me back and wanted to open a restaurant together. So we went back down to Italy and opened a place there.
At this point, you're not fluent in Italian, you're not fluent in German, nothing, right? Just English only?
I was stumbling my way through starting to learn a little Italian.
So I know it's like 20 years ago or so, but at the time, how easy was it to go abroad and work and do those things? Did you have to do any sort of temporary visa requirements or anything like that? I mean, this is all pre 9/11 and everything and all the security things, obviously. So
it's Italy and they're Italian. I tried paying taxes one year and they're like, we don't know why you're doing this. So whatever. It was definitively I'm just going to do this and we'll see what happens. Germany was a little different. That was one of the reasons I left Germany fairly expediently.
So with the restaurant in Italy, I think it's kind of open like a year. Eventually you and your partners kind of separate. Before coming back, did you do any traveling around or was it just like, yeah, it's time to go back to the US? Or
we closed down, we decided to kind of dissolve the restaurant, and partners had some family challenges, and we decided that we were going to go in separate directions. So my wife and I moved back pretty quickly thereafter. I mean, we'd done a little bit of travel, but for the most part, the time we spent in Italy was very much focused on where we were and kind of the surrounding areas and not jumping around so much. So quite a bit of time up in Alto Adige, a little bit of time in Piemonte, but that was about it.
Might be a dumb question, but was it an Italian restaurant? Like, was it pasta heavy or was it seafood focused? Or
it's tasting menu focused. So honestly, not that dissimilar to the way I cook today. There was some Italian influence. There was some general broad European influence, but mostly just tasting menu. It was 8 or 10 course tasting menu.
2006, you returned to the US, or maybe already in the US at the time, but you wind up in Texas at the inn at Dos Brijas.
Yeah, Dos Brijas. We went down there. We got back and we kind of bounced around for a little bit looking for jobs. That was back when you had to look for a job and where you had to compete for a job even. So we went back. We went and found this opportunity down in Texas and moved down there to a tiny little property that had just opened. Kind of dug our feet in there. And that was really the first time that I think there was a lot of growth that we did there. Dos Brijas was 4 rooms and small little fine dining restaurant on 313 acres or something like that. We had like an organic farm and horses and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, it was just a tiny little inn. And then we just opened and we took it from there to Relais and Chateau, Relais Gourmand, Mobile, back then when it was Mobile 5-star and all of those fun things. So
at this property, you're the executive chef, you're the sommelier, and then you're also the GM. Is that just because it was going to be just so small that it's a one person does it all? Or was there part of you that wanted the GM duties based on your previous experience with the restaurant in Italy where you would have more control over certain aspects of running the establishment?
I wasn't the chef. We actually had a chef there. What I was doing was, I started as, I think, assistant innkeeper. A few weeks after I got there, the GM quit, and then the innkeeper took the GM position. And then a few weeks later, he got fired. So I just printed out after a while, I just printed business cards that said I was the GM and never really looked back from there. I just filled the void that existed, basically running the property and running the wine program. And that was really kind of the start of managing properties for me and thinking beyond just, cooking this dish or serving that wine. It was really the first time that kind of started to holistically tackle the idea of hospitality in that way.
Was that something that was just like a new challenge for you to take on, kind of stepping beyond the kitchen? Or, was it just, let me explore this, I can always go back to the kitchen?
I always want to be in charge of anything I do. It was just, young and ignorant and overly ambitious and just wanted to move to the top as quick as I could. I wanted to get to the end line, and back before I realized that there is no end line. So it's really just seemed like the step up, seemed like a bigger title, seemed like a bigger thing, and I took it.
Later on that year, I think, or maybe it was slightly before that too, kind of the dates vary, but you wound up starting a winery with your dad, right?
Right around when we moved back, actually at the beginning, we started tinkering with this idea of questioning the potential of the Finger Lakes and what the real potential was and what was being assumed. And so we started tinkering with some wine at that time. And eventually, 2009, we started to make our first commercial wine and have moved forward from there.
That was like a 3-year process, because you guys started like filed or open trademark, whatever, 2005, 2006 timeframe, kind of.
We started building the business and the brand and the label and all of that stuff. So, there was a couple of vintages here and there that we made and to see what would happen. And then eventually went legit early 2010s with a label and license. And
was this a property that you guys were able to acquire and plant your own, or was there already established vines on the property, or did you lease and do it that way?
Element was born as a negociant. So we always, from the beginning, wanted to purchase fruit and wanted to purchase fruit from all of the Finger Lakes. We started out making some wines in my parents' little garage building. Then we moved down the hill to a bigger old auto body garage shop, and eventually moved to an even larger old auto body garage shop. So that label has really always been about being a negociant and buying and working with fruit from the open market. In 2017, we bought a vineyard that had been planted in 2000. And that's kind of the first foray into farming our own fruit and, really building what we're getting ready to launch as our kind of farm wine brand.
When you're starting this winery, what is the most challenging part as being kind of a first-time wine label owner, first-time winery owner? Is there anything that you encounter where it's like, oh, nobody told me this? Like,
one of the most important things that I can tell anybody is that making things is easy. Selling them sucks. I always thought that making good wine was going to be the challenge. That's easy. Selling wine sucks. I hate it, and I hate it. So to this day, I'm a horrible salesperson. It's great. Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest thing. And understanding how scale and margin works, and that if you want to sell it all yourself, that's a ton of sales work. And if you want someone else to sell it, then you make very little money per unit, and you need to make a lot of units.
What's the part of the winemaking process that is most important, in your opinion? Is it the growing aspect, the grapes, the processing, sales, story?
Those things shift along your path. So I think for me, the most important thing to start out with was winemaking. When I was starting and where the Finger Lakes were in their evolution at the time, winemaking was probably the most important thing that needed to be dialed in. Once winemaking is dialed in, because winemaking is so easy to create faults and problems if you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to control it well. Once you know how to make wine, which to me means creating a transparent process and a transparent wine, then you start to see the faults in viticulture. And then you see where, when you start to make wine, you can always screw up great grapes. But once you make wine well, then you see what those grapes' potential actually could be. And that's when you start to realize that the only way to make better wine is to grow better wine. I think that there's it's a scale, right? It's like, what's more important, how you cook or what product you get? You can get the greatest steak in the world and still burn it. But once you know how to cook a perfect steak, the only way to make that better is to get a better steak to begin with. And so I think that same thing goes for wine. Once you know how to make wine really well, you realize that the only thing left is to get better grapes to start with.
2009, you take over as GM and I believe executive chef at Hotel Faucher.
Yeah, and Pennsylvania. Yeah, my wife and I moved from Texas up to Pennsylvania, and she and I took on the GM role together. And that was where I was running the kitchen as well.
That's another property that you're running. You turn it into this award-winning property, you know, Realis and all these other things come to. And when you get to that point, when you start getting all these awards and kind of recognition for your work and a chef at that moment, are there any that like are more important to you or that you're more proud of than the others? Or is it all just kind of like, this is great, or this doesn't mean that much, I'm doing it for other reasons kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really a time where it was another growth time for us. In hindsight, I spent probably far too much time thinking about, or in my role as chef and not enough time in my role as manager. Spent far too much time in my role as doer and not overseer. At the same time, it was really the opportunity that it was really the first time that we really dove into turning a property around financially, really dove into how to build a better financial business. It was a really important kind of time and moment for us in that way. So I think for me, some of the biggest things that we did was how we basically turned a struggling financial model into one that was at least above break even. I think that was, for me, probably the biggest success that we saw there. We also opened a number of new concepts there. So we, took over a patisserie and we opened a barbecue place and we opened more and more. So, there was this growth, but really it was gaining the financial understanding, and that was the most important to us at the time.
Maybe looking on it back now, maybe not during the time when you're going through it, but that all sounds to me like almost a proof of concept for you as an individual to where you're eventually going to get to this point where you're running your own hospitality organization. You're not financially liable for everything, right? Like you're still financially dependent upon the property, but like it's not all your money into that property. And it's like, well, let me see if I can do this.
Yeah. And I think, that was our last stop before realizing that I was tired of fixing the problems that other people created. I wanted to create my own problems to fix. I knew that I could destroy things as well as anybody to begin with. So, we really wanted to move into this opportunity where we weren't fixing other people's earlier mistakes. That was kind of really important to me in thinking through how to, what we wanted to do in the future. We'd seen a lot of models and we'd been at fine dining and high-end stuff for a really long time. I kind of started to understand where the financial ability was there, where the financial opportunities were for success and where they weren't. And that was really kind of how we started to address this moving, this idea of opening our own place. We've been there for a while, started to grow a little stagnant. And, I was also going through my MS exams at the time, where Mr. Dillman and I got to know each other quite well going through that. And eventually it was just, I knew I needed a change in my life. I knew that I wasn't going to overcome my exams that I was trying to do if I just kept doing the same old routine over and over. And so that was really when we decided that it was time for us to launch out and do our own thing. And, I'd seen so many broken systems over the years and so many, I think I've seen how broken the hospitality world and model really is. And we wanted to take our chances at seeing if we could create a better model in the future. So that's really what drove us to make that decision to start our own thing.
With today's generation, where we're at now, do you think that people need to wait as long to open their own properties and own businesses, or should they kind of be... It's like with a presidential election, right? You should always run before you're ready instead of after you think you're ready, because usually it's too much bad stuff comes out about you and you tank your own candidacy. But is it similar to that aspect where, you're never really going to feel ready, but if you wait too long, it's going to do more damage than if you jump too early kind of thing?
I think it's really important to understand how many times you need to fail before you'll succeed. And I think that if you think failure is that not succeeding now means failure, you're already defeated. So one of the really important things for me was all the mistakes that I've made. And one of the things that guides the best and most successful aspects of what we do is based off of all the times I messed it up in the past and all the mistakes I've made. So I think one of the really important things is getting experience by making mistakes, getting experience and learning those lessons. I wanted to open a restaurant as soon as I got out of college. In fact, I was planning on opening one while I was in college. I'm so glad I didn't open that restaurant. I'm so glad that never happened. I'm so glad I got to live through all these challenges and all these jobs that I've done and all the places that I've worked. I'm really glad I got to do that because every single one of those bad experiences shaped something about how I work today, and hopefully in a better way. So, I think you could jump into opening a restaurant right away. Understand you're going to have a lot of failures. You're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. It doesn't really matter. I don't know that there's a right time to do it or a wrong time to do it. I do know that the more times you fail, the more likely you will be to succeed. What is that, like failure success training or something like that? A lot of those those cheesy motivational cat posters and shit, like a lot of that stuff's really true. What is it? Like the more experience I have, the luckier I get or something like that.
What's the Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take or something like that kind of thing,
They sound a little cheesy, but it's true. I think one of the most important things for me coming through the MS program was an acceptance and understanding of what failure is and what not succeeding yet is, and understanding the difference between the two.
Yeah, with that, how many times did you take the master exam?
Or
because you mentioned a few minutes ago, basically, like, you were taking the exams and you weren't getting over the hump and you're like, well, I have to change, how I'm approaching this. Is that why you started doing all those competitions? Because in 2010, you do and win Wines of South Africa World Cup wine competition. Then like the next year, you're named Best Young Sommelier and I think take third place at the Best Sommelier in America competition. The year after that, you're named Best Young Sommelier. So like, is that why you started doing all those wine competitions?
People know me for winning those competitions. They don't know me for all the times that I didn't win those competitions. They know me from the last 3 years of those things where I started to win all of them. They don't know me from the first 10 that I was greatly outcompeted and lost horribly. And those are really important lessons. For me, that was just practice, right? Like every single time you put yourself under stress, you get better. Every single time you put yourself in a weird situation or give yourself pressure or are pushed to learn, you get better. I fucking hate not knowing something. If you ask me a question and I don't know the answer and I'm embarrassed, I'm going to go learn that answer and I'm never going to miss that question again. If I don't know something, I want to. So every single one of those competitions was just me going, oof, not good enough yet. Nope, not there. I need to know more about that. Need to know more about that. And then I just got really tired of missing questions. So I studied more. I learned more. So I'd stop missing them. So I think all of that stuff like adds up together. And, I think it's funny because coming through the last 2.5 years of COVID in business, I've had a lot of really hopefully great opportunities to learn and to think and to prepare myself for what is going to happen in the future. And coming to grips with the fact that someday we might have to close a restaurant. We might have to close down our company. Anybody who didn't think about that during COVID is lying. What happens when we don't make it? What happens if we go bankrupt? For a really long time, my whole life, mostly, I would have thought about that as failure. And I would have looked at that as the worst thing that could possibly happen. After all the times, all the competitions I lost, after all the attempts at the MS exam that I didn't pass, I realized that when this company stops working out for me, it's fine. We're going to close it down and we're going to open a new one. We're going to open a new one better, stronger, and smarter with less mistakes. And that a business failing isn't failure. It's a step along the journey towards what the final success is going to be. So, for me, that was like with the MS program, that was a really big thing. I failed that MS exam 3 times, or at least I thought I did. And then when I finally passed it, I realized that I never failed the exam. I just didn't pass it when I wanted to, didn't pass it again. When I look back now, I never failed at becoming an MS. I am an MS. I never failed at becoming the best young sommelier in the world. I am, or I was, or I did, or whatever. Like, I achieved that. And the years that led up to that I didn't achieve it weren't failure. They were just learning opportunities that prepared me for it. Starting to take that and thinking about business right now is a really important part of what I've spent the last couple of years thinking about. Is something not working, something not succeeding isn't failure. It's just an opportunity to learn from and learn how to do it better the next time.
Sticking with the master's exam, May 2013, you become the 199th person in the world to pass it, the Master Sommelier exam. I think you're the first ever to pass it that was also a working chef at the time. What was the most difficult or challenging part of the exam for you? Was it theory or tasting or?
Getting out of your own way. Tasting was the portion that hung me up, but my own fear was probably the biggest part that held me back. I passed my service my first attempt. I passed my theory my second attempt, and I didn't pass tasting any of the first 3 tries. And it wasn't until a couple of major things changed for me. I think a little bit of it was the deciding to break with the security that I had and decide to leave my job and decide to launch out on my own and make a change one way or the other. But a really big part of it was also, first of all, it was to stop trying to be like other people and to stop thinking that other people had an advantage and to stop trying to mimic what other people were doing. One of the really big and important things for me was actually recognizing that I was not a good taster, or at least I wasn't an instinctual taster, which is what I thought I had to be to pass the exam. And I saw other people who were good at being an instinctual taster. And I had to come to grips with the fact that I wasn't that. And I had to find a way that wasn't the way I thought, but it was the way that worked for me. So coming back and actually recognizing that I wasn't good at tasting the way that other people were, I needed to find my own path was really important to me. And then the other thing that really became important was realizing that was not caring about it anymore as much. You know, I say this a lot, but there's a time at which you want to be a master sommelier and you work really hard towards being that. And for me, it's you become a master sommelier when you're the best at what you do. As opposed to studying for something, it's you just become really good at what you do. And then that next step falls into place. For me, one of the things that became really important was that stopped being the goal. It stopped being the thing that was most important to me. It was something I wanted, but it wasn't something I needed anymore. Like I didn't need that to make my career. My career was already happening. Certainly I wanted it. Certainly it would help, but it no longer defined me and I didn't need it to define me. So that became really important was the moment that I kind of left after resetting and I went, you know what, kid, I don't need this. You know what, I'm going to go back and I'll give it a shot. This isn't going to dominate my life anymore. And I went in not caring as much. And that was super, super important to me. You know, and I think the other thing is I spent so much time before that fearing failure that when I went in that room, I was already at a negative because I was going in thinking, trying not to fail as opposed to trying to succeed. And so, you know, that last attempt, I didn't study anymore. Like I didn't really care. I kind of went in with this mentality of like, I'm already on the top of my game. I'm on this level. Sorry, that's kind of on you at this point. So I stopped putting the pressure on myself. I went in with the intention to pass, not with the intention not to fail. All of that stuff kind of really came together for me at that time.
When they tell you that you pass, is it more joy or relief?
It's a lot of bewilderment. It's a lot of not really even understanding what's happened. It's a lot of finally not having to make a disappointing call to my wife to let her know. So, you know, I think it's a lot of both. You know, for me, again, I kind of went into that last year not as caught up in it, not needing it. I always think about, I love the movie Cool Runnings. I think it is maybe one of my favorite motivational movies. And to me, like tracks perfectly with this path towards becoming an MS and now this path as an entrepreneur. There's that line when John Candy says, if you're not enough without the medals, you'll never be enough with the gold medals. And that to me is so like important. Like it stopped being, I didn't need the pin to be who I was going to be in the industry. It wasn't important anymore. I went in with that. I went in kind of going, if you don't get it, you don't get it. And I don't know that I need this anymore. When I was getting my results, I remember them, you know, kind of back before we had to just tell you right away whether you passed or failed or didn't pass. So they were the two who were giving me my results were kind of toying with me. And they were like, so what part don't you think you passed? And I was like, well, and they were like, oh, you passed tasting. And I was like, all right, cool. I don't care. They're like, no. Like, we got more feedback for it. It's fine. I don't care. If I pass tasting, service or theory, I'll get them next year. I'm good. They're like, no, come back and sit down. Guys, I'm fine. I'm in a great mood. It doesn't matter. I don't care which other part I didn't pass. I'll get it. Finally, they were like, this isn't working at all. Just sit down. You passed. Okay. I was like, oh, all right, great. I got all my joy when I found out I finally passed tasting. That was the thing I couldn't get. And that was the thing I finally got. And I was like, everything else I'll figure out. I need to study a little more next year. I'll study a little more. I need to do something different in service. I'll figure that out. That's easy. I don't know. I think it's a mix of all of those.
How accurate is the Master Somm exams portrayal in movies or documentaries like Somm? Is that a pretty accurate portrayal of what people go through?
Honestly, I saw the movie. I saw part of the movie once after I passed and haven't really paid much attention. In theory, I think it's pretty good. In theory, I think I think they did a pretty good job at portraying it. Obviously, you look through it and you go, it's more than that. It's blah, 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 blah. But I think in general, for something that brought what we do to the masses, I think they did a great job with it. It's hard. The 3 or 4 gentlemen that are in there had their own particular style and their own characteristics coming through it. We all have them. We all have our challenges. We all have our idiosyncrasies. And I think they did a really good job with it.
Once you passed, did you ever consider pursuing any other certificates, or were you just like, I'm done with the certification portion of your career? Like, I don't really want to do any WSET stuff or anything like that.
I thought for a minute, after you pass the MS exam, nobody talks about it, but there's always a period of depression that happens, as you sort of have had this thing that's dominated your horizon for so long.
At least 3 years, right? It's like a minimum of 3 years, probably. Even if you passed everything on the first try, like.
I was 12 years into the program when I passed, and this thing that has created many, many years and driven many years of your life is all of a sudden behind you. And then you go, what the hell do I do now? So I definitely thought about like doing the WSET MW program. And as I said earlier on, I'm not much of a writer. Definitely way better at speaking and way better at numbers than I am spelling. So I was like, that's not going to be for me. Thought about doing the Cicerone program and I kind of kicked it around a little bit and maybe I'll do it again at some point. But, again, those things don't drive me anymore. Being an entrepreneur, being an employer, providing opportunity for others, those are far more important to me than little letters next to a name or another pin or bauble. I'd rather now I want to be successful in what I really care about.
About a year after you pass, you open F.L.X. Winery with your wife, Isabel, back home in the Finger Lakes, where you're kind of originally from. How did you guys decide that was going essentially back home was the right choice? Because, I mean, you could go anywhere and set up anywhere.
We'd started the winery at this point. We're selling the wines. And so I was continuously back and forth dealing with them and making them and dealing with that. Every time I went back to the Finger Lakes, I couldn't help but notice how absolutely stunningly beautiful it is and how much I love the place and the landscape and the scenery and all of those things. And, eventually I got to a point where I'd been gone long enough that it didn't feel like failure going home. It wasn't like I couldn't make it in the real world, so I had to come back. I just think it's one of the most beautiful, magical places in the world. And we started, as we were more and more involved in the scene, we started to recognize that there was still a fair amount of opportunity and development that needed to be done in the hospitality landscape in order to, really build this into the wine region that we believed it can be. It was an opportunity and we saw it and we took it.
The first place that you opened, the F.L.X. Winery, it's casual fare. What was kind of the thought process behind that? Because usually people, their first restaurant that's the big grand idea. And you guys kind of went definitely a different direction than most people would.
Yeah, well, we did it with our own money, with a credit card's money. We did it on our own. There was a lot of budgetary things that weren't possible. And, I think ultimately at the end of the day, for us, fancy isn't what matters. Thought and care are what matter. And it really doesn't matter to me whether I'm cooking foie gras or a hot dog. It's the amount of attention and sort of care and attention to detail that you put into it that makes the difference. Hamburgers are magical if they're made with love and thought and attention. We don't need fancy to be good. So, if we opened a simple place but we open a place that's as thoughtful as any other, for sure. And, I think that goes for the beverage program. Yeah, it's a winery, it's hot dogs and hamburgers with a very small little wine list of 50 wines, but really precisely chosen wine and really precisely chosen beer and all of that. So, it's really about care and hospitality more than grand dining rooms and shiny bars and fancy food. I don't need it to be tasting menu to be hospitality.
You eventually do open your tasting menu restaurant like a year and a half later, though. So
yeah, I mean, well, that's all about diversity and diversification. I cut my teeth as general manager starting in 2007 was really like the first realization of what can happen in the world. And so as we watched that bubble burst, I wanted to be prepared for that. So a couple of things, like we all know that through thick and thin, everybody loves hamburgers and everybody loves dick jokes. So the Wienery was a pretty easy start into that. We wanted to do something a little bit more scratch the itch for a little bit finer dining. And we saw an opportunity. And so we opened Table. And then from there, we opened a fried chicken place. So, it's just kind of diversifying that portfolio and not putting all the eggs into one basket, having seen how easy that basket can be knocked over if a bubble bursts or we deal with some crazy inflation or something like that. I wanted to make sure that we were diversified for, just for security.
With these concepts, are these things that you were thinking about along the way throughout your career, even back to a couple properties before when you were opening, a barbecue spot and this, 4 different concepts at the one place? Like, is that all stuff that you're kind of filing away as you're going through? And it's like, okay, if I ever get the chance to open my own stuff, I'm going to open something like this. And I want to open something like this.
We know what we're passionate about and what we care about and what we're excited about. And that drives a bit of it. It's also what the space feels like. We wanted to do something a little bit fancier than the Wienery when we started. But when we found the space, that was what the space wanted to be. Like the ceilings in that place are like 6'4". So they're about here. So there isn't really a whole lot more that could be done in there. It just wasn't conducive. When we found Table, we didn't go looking to make Table. We went and found a space that spoke to us that we were excited about and just said, what could we do here? And, Table really was just born from, honestly, the way we cook at home and the way we have dinner parties and we have friends over. And that was really the driving force behind it, is like, this is what we do every day when we're at home. This is how we entertain. This is how we want to eat. Maybe a little less so about 5 courses, but the first course, the farmer's board that's always been there, just quite literally what we make every single time we have people over at our house.
Around that same time, I think Food and Wine names you Sommelier of the Year when you guys are opening F.L.X. Table. How much does like a recognition like that help? Does it matter? You've already done your master, you're kind of done with the exams, you're opening restaurants, and then you kind of get this almost like a follow-up recognition and award. And it's like, I'm sure it's an honor, but like, how much does that kind of matter? Is it more about like, great, this will help the business versus like me individually kind of thing?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's all about keeping the business in the news cycle, right? So we don't have a PR company. We can't afford any of that kind of stuff. So, everything that we've done is word of mouth and just self-promotion. So every little piece like that is hugely impactful for us. And, it helps that we're in this tiny little weird market and we've done these weird things and people are always, surprised by the juxtaposition of like all those fancy titles and then the Wienery. So, it helps with that. But, really it's about staying on people's minds and, continuously reminding people that we're here. So, yeah, those things are huge.
2019, you were a judge at the Cantor World Wine Awards. What does a judge duty entail at something like that?
Wine judging is its own beast in industry. And I've had the opportunity to do many. The Cantor and TechSom are really great wine competitions to judge. Basically, I mean, you're tasting 120 wines in an afternoon, and along with another panel or with a panel of judges, you're rating these wines as to, how they show for the category, their class, and their style. So, you're really just going through and assigning medals or awards based on how a wine looks, smells, tastes, feels, all of those things.
Is that more of just something you enjoy doing? Is that collaboration aspect where you get to meet all these other individuals? Or, what's kind of the driving force behind wanting to do it? Or is it just trying to stay sharp?
I remember reading about Decanter Wine Awards when I was just getting into this, and like the icons and the legends who got to judge at these things. So, I mean, that was really getting to do that was just such a great honor to all of a sudden be amongst these legends, to be involved and be doing something that, you've associated with these people for so long. So it's such a great honor to do that. Honestly, a lot of it now is socialization, getting to hang out with peers at least once a year, that kind of thing. So, I always like to go to those events, and, it's just seeing people I don't get to see all that often, seeing people who, I share similar interests with and really like, and we run in the same world, but we're all running so fast and so far, and we don't get a chance to see each other that often. So it's really nice to do those competitions and do those shows and those expositions and just keep up with people.
2021. So, after the start of the pandemic, you guys opened 3 different properties all in the same building. F.L.X Provisions, which is like your kind of marketplace retail shop. The Quincy Exchange, which is like a bistro style restaurant, and Maillard Club, which is like a steakhouse and raw bar restaurant. Like I said, it's all in the same building. Was that always kind of the plan to have 3 concepts in the same building, or did it just kind of materialize that way?
We'd started to grow interested in the Corning market, and we had been looking for a place for a while that would, as kind of a juxtaposition to Table, that would let us sell wine. Table's amazing because we get to pour the most amazing wines in the world, but we didn't really have a place where like we sold wine and could move wine. And so we really wanted to do something along those lines, and we knew we wanted to open a steakhouse. We thought that a steakhouse might be that place for us. And so we started looking for spaces, and through a series of happenstance, got a call about the steakhouse in Corning that may be looking for a transition. And so they asked if we were interested, and we immediately were. And so we jumped on the opportunity, but it was such a big space. I'm not one for building the church for Easter Sunday. I'd rather build it small and have it full every day than have it full once a year. So we kind of looked at all this space and thought about how we could carve it up into really unique, smaller concepts that were unique to each other and different, and knew that we wanted to open essentially these 3 different concepts in here.
That total kind of package thing where there's, 3 different businesses all in the same building or on different floors of the same building is starting, I feel like, to gain a little bit more traction. There's a couple of people in the DC area that have done it, and different markets and stuff like that. Do you think that's going to be something that more and more hospitality groups kind of look at? Because there is that consolidation of, well, you only have one rent, it's easier to bring in different source for different ingredients and stuff like that. Like, that's a big proponent of what Jose Andres does, is he always has like 3 or 4 restaurants in the same area. They're not always in the same building, but
when you asked, my first thought was like, really is something that like Minibar was kicked off back in the day. So, back when Minibar was in, what was that in? I forget which restaurant that was in, Haleo or something. But yeah, I mean, I think for efficiency, it's really important. One of the things as a group that we're really kind of clamoring towards as quickly as we can is, how we can approach consolidated buying and purchasing power. How we can utilize our different concepts so that we can start buying whole cattle instead of individual cuts. And so how we can, use that power and that diversity to give us, unique outlets. But when it's all in one building, there's a lot of advantages to being able to operate different concepts, different smaller concepts with a lot of the same infrastructure. It's real simple, but it's one Wi-Fi bill. It's one walk-in, it's one dry storage, it's all of these individual things that don't necessarily scale by being in the same building. So it makes perfect sense to me.
Feast & Co. Catering is the arm of the hospitality group that does the large events, weddings, parties, stuff like that. Have you guys seen an increase since kind of COVID, the lockdowns expired and everybody's gotten back out there? And because like here in Columbus, we used to live across, me and my wife used to live across the street basically from a small wedding venue. But as soon as they were able to start doing weddings and stuff again, it was just every Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They were just having events. So I was curious, did business just drastically like uptick for that as soon as people were like allowed and ready to start hosting events and stuff like that again?
Yeah, inquiries and opportunities certainly did. Unfortunately, like many, we've had to turn down most of them because we just don't have the team, or I can't guarantee that we'll have enough team members to handle all the business. I think a lot of us have ended up having to cancel catering opportunities because we just don't have enough staff. So there's certainly a ton of opportunity and a ton of business out there. It's just the ability to actually capture it and handle it right now that I think is holding everybody back.
Is the staffing for you guys, is that because of your location? The Finger Lakes isn't, it's populous, but it's not Chicago. It's not, you know what I mean? Like you're pulling from different people. Everybody's obviously got to take a car to wherever they're going to. So you don't really have that public transportation aspect either.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to Chicago, every single business has a sign in the window saying we're hiring all positions right now too. It's really easy to look at the employment crisis that we're having right now and to think that it's specific to your circumstance, right? We do it all the time, and we think all the time that everybody left the hospitality industry. The hospitality industry has lost all their employees. There's nobody in the hospitality industry. There's no one in any industry. Everyone is short on employees. There's no fire department people. There's no police. There's no grocery store workers. There's no truck drivers. Most industries are struggling for employees right now. Sure. I'm sure you can think of one or two that might not be, and I'm sure there's one or two companies that aren't right now. But the reality is that there is not enough American workforce for the amount of jobs that currently exist. And this is going to be the driver of the future for the next 15 years.
With how many people that unfortunately died because of COVID, like a majority of those people were basically just pulled out of the workforce. There are vacancies just from those people alone that unfortunately, passed away from that, virus and everything too, as well, that I don't think a lot of places just kind of block that aspect out,
That's one aspect of it. This was already in motion before COVID. We always want to glorify the past and think that this is a problem now. No, there's been staffing problems in most industries for the last 10 years. It's really been an employee game. It's not just COVID. This didn't just happen. This didn't happen when, there was extended unemployment and all of those things. It may have amplified it, and it certainly made it feel stronger. But the reality is that we're already on this path. We've had declining birth rates for the last 30 years. We have the largest generation in the history of the Americas, the baby boomers, at retirement age. They were retiring 1 million people per year prior to the pandemic, and they retired at 3 million per year during the pandemic. That's created this employment vacuum that's sucked everybody up through it. Now, the other thing is that the baby boomers, I believe, acquired more wealth than has ever been acquired in human history. We have something along the lines of the highest rate of prime age male workforce is living with their parents now than has done so in like the last 40 years. And we've got 20 plus years of anti-immigration policy. Yet kind of add that together and we have less workers than we have ever had. We have an immense number of new jobs, industries, and job styles. We look at what the gig economy has created. We look at all the tech jobs that didn't exist 20 years ago. And we look at all the jobs that are being created because the boomers are retiring and want all these experiences. And there's no one to create those experiences for them. So we've got less people in the workforce and more jobs. And, we almost touched on this earlier, but the reality is that the new workforce and the style and what they're looking for their careers and their lifestyles is flexibility. And it's not something that a lot of traditional jobs offer. You can log in and drive Uber any time of the night, whenever you feel like it. You can do your coding for computers at any time. But if you want to work in a coffee shop, you need to be at work at 6:30 and stay open until 2:30 every day. Doesn't matter, like every day. And that just isn't jiving with a new generation. So you got more jobs, you got less people to fill them. That's where we are now.
F.L.X. Frybird, that's your fried chicken concept. Is that in the pop-up stages, or is that something that you guys are going to spin off to its own location?
Oh, it's already its own location. Oh, yeah. Frybird started in a fairly small little location and has now moved to down the street to a much larger location. So, yeah, no, that's definitively a full-fledged restaurant and one that I hope we get a chance to open multiple of in the future.
So that would be kind of the franchise, multiple location kind of arm of the group.
We opened a second wienery during COVID. We had plans prior to COVID of opening multiple wieneries and multiple Frybirds in the future.
And then you're also working on a little bit of a passion project, F.L.X. Culture House, which is like your sour beer. How did you kind of first, guy with his wine background, obviously that's not all you drink all the time, but now you're also, messing around with sour beers too.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I've always cycled between beer and wine, cocktails. I got really back into beer really heavy in probably 2008 or 2009. I started to get really interested in beer again after many years of focusing on wine. And started brewing, and I've kind of done it ever since, just home brewing stuff. And I don't do anything on a small scale. So, I always had some barrels of beer floating around the house. And when we started Table, it was an opportunity that we were looking at with how we license our businesses. And so we decided to start this little brewing project. So started brewing some sours and putting them away in the cellar. And after 6 years of doing it now, that's actually coming to fruition this week, or in the last couple of weeks. We've finally started to bottle those. So we've essentially made cuvées out of pretty much all the barrels that I've been stacking away, and we've started to bottle some wild ales this week, or we started 2 weeks ago, and I hope we're going to finish next week. And at the same time, we started working with one of our partner breweries, and so we've been brewing an IPA for about 1.5 years now. We've started brewing an unfiltered Pilsner that we're really excited about. And hopefully we'll be launching a couple of new beers under that label in the next couple of months.
Do you still lecture at the International Culinary Center?
I haven't since COVID started. And frankly, I just haven't had the time since they're back in session. One of the great things about COVID is it brought a very abrupt stop to all of my travels, and kind of reshifted some of our, focus and priorities. So there was a really hard stop in how much teaching I've been doing. And now as it's starting to open back up, I'm just able to be a little more selective in where I spend my time and how much time I spend on the road.
With everything that you've accomplished across your career, how do you find the time? Like, you're a restaurant owner, you're a chef, you're a sommelier, you're making beer, you're making wine. Is it being extremely organized? Is it singularly focused on one thing at a time? Is it not sleeping?
I would say that those are 3 examples of things that I am not at all. It's having a great team and having trust in them. It's building a team that has the same vision and has the same beliefs, really being able to work with them to make all that stuff possible. I mean, nothing I do would be possible without the team that makes it happen. And I think in some cases it's a little bit of throwing caution to the wind and taking some chances and accepting that not everything's going to be perfect. There's going to be mistakes along the way. If you're not comfortable with mistakes, then you can't live the lifestyle that I live. That's for sure, because they're going to happen, and we just accept it and deal with it as it happens.
Out of all your possible titles you could introduce yourself, someone to, a stranger, sommelier, chef, what one would you choose? What one's your favorite?
Christopher. That's it. I'm not much for titles, and I don't really like to talk really much about what I do, to be honest. So, I think if I had to, what's the most important thing that I do today? It's really be an employer. There was a really long time that I wanted to be a chef. There was a really long time that I wanted to be a general manager. There was a really long time that I wanted to be an owner. Eventually, I think I became an entrepreneur. And now I really just think of myself as an employer. And that's the most important thing.
You're still involved with the quartermaster sommeliers. You also teach too as well. I mean, they had a controversy a short time ago. And, the sommeliers that we've had on the podcast, it's a younger generation mostly. And a decent amount of them is kind of they've been turned off to the court, kind of taking a wait and see approach to see, what changes are made and everything like that. What's your take on it? Is you're involved with them? Is that something you've seen changes internally and you're proud of the direction that they're going? You think it needs more work?
In transparency, I'm on the board of directors, and I've been on the board of directors since 2019. So I've been through a lot on the board of directors. Certainly, there were problems in our organization. There was challenges, problems in pretty much any organization that's been around for a while. And there were certainly mistakes that were made. I have always been proud of the achievements of my own achievements. I've always been proud of the achievements of fellow master sommeliers. And overall, I think that the organization has done a lot of great things over the years. Certainly has had some missteps and made some mistakes. But I've been really, and I am very proud of the progress that we've made and of, how hard we've all worked to build the organization to what it is and how we've worked to make the changes that needed to be made. So, we've had challenges. Everybody does. I think it's not about, certainly it would be great to have not had those challenges. Really done a lot to address them and to try and build a better future for everybody involved.
When you look at this kind of up and coming or next generation of sommelier, what do you see? Do you see it being more women than men, or do you see people that are probably going to do, maybe one or two levels of the certification and then strive out on their own business? Or
I think the industry is changing in a lot of ways, and certainly our kind of access to information is changing a lot. I think that what the Court of Master Sommeliers does, what its potentials are for education, are really amazing and huge. And I would say the same thing about a lot of the other organizations that are out there, WSET and things like that. For me, the structure of that, kind of the push that going for an exam, that the drive for succeeding in an exam, all really helped me and helped me grow to be a better sommelier, a better professional. I talked about it earlier, but to me, a better business person and entrepreneur now. Those were really important to me. They aren't for everybody, but I do think that a lot of the best educational programs out there have a really strong future as we look towards, the ultimate goal at the end of the day is to help more people achieve pleasure from, the things that we enjoy. I want to help other people get the same pleasure out of wine that I get. I want to help other people drink better. I want to help other people, discover all of these things. At the end of the day, I want to make better drinkers. That's my goal. So I think that the future has a lot of opportunity for that. And I think as we look at how the world is changing and how many more opportunities there are to help people learn more about beverage, I think it's amazing. And I look forward to seeing kind of the future of the Court of Master Sommeliers. I look forward to seeing the future of the profession of sommelier. There continues to be this ongoing question of, is the sommelier going away as, we get apps for our phone to tell us about wine and all that stuff. For me, it's all about hospitality and remembering that at the core, we're not encyclopedias about wine. We're people who offer hospitality and know a bunch about wine and can help you with that.
Trying to figure out how to phrase this the best, but had a few people on the podcast and one of their kind of, I guess, complaints about the wine industry is, and taking exams and stuff, is there certain, wines and vintages that are just at these astronomical price levels. And it's just, you're expected to know them, but the barrier to entry on a price or cost of a certain bottle or certain wine that is a staple is just pretty much out of reach for a lot of people. And then you look at inflation and prices rising and supply and demand, and it all kind of relates to that. But do you kind of worry or think that there'll be a shift in kind of the wines that maybe are the big celebrity famous wines? Do you think there'll be a shift away from kind of those because of their price points towards more approachable things?
No, I don't. I mean, I hope that we're experiencing a bubble and that it bursts at some point, because, the wine world has become in many ways a trophy world for people. And that certainly is a challenge and a problem. I think I kind of was on the cusp of seeing that happen. I remember when I was in college, I bought my first bottle of First Growth, and it was $250 back then. A couple of years later, those bottles were $1,200. Not that 250 is approachable or affordable, but it certainly is more affordable than 1,000. So, I think I was on that kind of cusp of watching a lot of wines become unattainable for people. And again, remembering that for some people, a $15 bottle of wine is out of reach. For some people, a $5,000 bottle is out of reach. For some people, a $100 bottle is out of reach. Like, everybody has a point on this scale, and wine is an expensive product to make. It'll never be accessible to everyone, everywhere, ever. But certainly I think that what's happened in the last 10 years, 20 years of these wines becoming trophies is, it's challenging. I don't think it's going to go away. And I think that it's important to remember that what we drink changes constantly. So sure, I don't get to drink First Growth Bordeaux very often, and I certainly don't get to buy First Growth Bordeaux anymore, but it doesn't mean that I don't find something to replace that. When all of a sudden Chablis has gotten really expensive lately and the style has changed a lot, I don't really drink Chablis anymore. I drink Muscadet instead, and now as Muscadet's style changes, and I'm pretty sure is going to start to get really expensive really soon, I'm going to move to another place that I'm not going to tell anybody about because I don't want that to get expensive too. So, we're always changing what we drink. And, the same thing goes, I think, across all spectrums. You still need to know about Domaine de la Romanée-Conti or Rousseau. You still need to know about Chateau Latour. Doesn't mean that you drink those wines every day, but you need to be familiar with them to be really able to, I think, understand all the other aspects of the wine industry. You may not have ever tasted it, but you still need to know it. If you're an architect, you may not have been to the Empire State Building, but you should probably be familiar with it, I assume. As an artist, you might not have seen every, Picasso, but you should be aware of who Picasso is and things and what the art is. Like, I know we can't all have everything that we want. Wine, I think, lives in that funny thing of like, we can look at those bottles and say that they're irrelevant because they don't live in my sphere. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be cognizant of them. I think that theory and knowledge is important.
When you're building out the wine lists for your different restaurants, what's your methodology? Because I saw I think the Maillard Club has 1,200 to 1,500 bottle selection there. So most of it, I think, is from the Finger Lakes, correct?
No, that when that property finally is able to open, once I find enough staff, that list we'll have a pretty big component of Finger Lakes. But really, the focus there is going to be on old California, old Bordeaux, old Burgundy, old Rhone, kind of wines that I love that we don't see a whole lot of availability for anymore, and we see oftentimes as kind of unapproachable. But my goal is to make those approachable for people.
So you essentially are kind of taking the wine list and matching it to the property, essentially, is kind of how you go.
I want the wine list to fit to the theme, the concepts, and at the same time, I want it to, it's a tool for me to help people be better drinkers. So my goal with a wine list is certainly to put things that people want on there, but also to put things that people should want on there, even if they don't know they do yet. It's trying to build it's built into the concept. It's kind of baked into what we see a need for in, the location or the market or the time. And then it's how do we help people make better drinking decisions? Well, we don't give them bad options. So, I think there's a lot of that goes into every wine list.
Is there a wine region, wine style that you find yourself kind of gravitating towards? Usually every sommelier has that region that they first fell in love with, whatever that was. So I guess that, essentially what was that, or what is that for you?
I like really old wine. I really like a very British palate in that way. I like my wines dead and decrepit. So, it's funny because I think in that way, when I started getting into wine, old wine was 1980s or early 90s. And that's still where my cutoff for old wine starts, even though it's 20 years later now. So, back when I was getting into wine in 2002, if I had a bottle of 92 Cabernet, I was like, this is old wine. If I had a bottle of 88 Cabernet, I was like, this is old wine. Well, those wines are 14 years old then. They're 34 years old now. So I don't know that I feel like my calibration still hasn't changed along with that, but I do gravitate towards that. I mean, I love old school California from 60s, 70s, and 80s. Love old Bordeaux, and I still love Riesling. I'd say probably new obsession. The Rhone has really become an area that I can't live without. And then sherry, simple white wines. Those are my daily grind.
Is there a wine region that you're excited to focus on in the near future or see what comes out of or how it changes?
Other than the Finger Lakes, yeah. I really love the wines of northwestern Spain. So there's, like the cool, like a lot of the mountain stuff, Ribera Sacra and all of those areas. I love those wines and I'm dying to see more of that. Same thing with Savoie. Like I really dig those wines from Savoie, and I need to taste more. I need to learn more, and I just can't wait to learn more about them.
Are you able to enjoy a dinner out, or do you compulsively check the wine list when you're at a restaurant, see what they have?
Definitely like to look at wine lists, but more often than not, I prefer to stay at home and cook far more than going out.
Best Chris Dillman story that you have, and you can go in any direction that you want with this.
Most of my favorite Chris Dillman stories are stories that Chris Dillman told me. Chris and I have sat many exams together, and we have been unsuccessful at many exams together. So I think most of my favorite times with him are hanging out and after the fact or while nervously awaiting results and drinking shitty beer and eating burgers or wings or fries and just kicking it and chilling.
How has the food and restaurant industry in the Finger Lakes changed since you've been involved? What do you think needs to change and where do you think it's headed?
A very politically charged question there, and one I prefer to stay away from. I think that there has been a lot of great progress in hospitality in the Finger Lakes. I think the restaurant scene has definitively started to change, and there was a couple of great leaders in the community who have continued their work. But I think there's a lot of new, fresh faces and voices that are really starting to, come on the scene. And, I think in the long term, as the region changes, we need to make sure that the future that we're creating all of the experiences that the future customer is going to want. And so as we look at, the wines garnering attention and drawing people interested in those experiences we need to make sure that we have the hospitality experiences that customer is looking for. So, that means making sure that that we have great lodging opportunities for people, that we have really experiential lodging, and that we have really great restaurants for the future customer, for the people who are learning about the wines that we're making today and are starting to engage with them. We need to make sure that we have the opportunities that they might want in other luxury wine regions. So I think that's a really important next step for us.
What's next for you professionally? I mean, you guys are always kind of working on something. You got the beer thing is getting ready to kick off, working on, filling some open positions in two. But, any additional concepts kind of in the work? Would you, something like a vegetable only restaurant because of all the farms that you guys have around, or what's next?
What's next is rebuilding. We've had a lot of setbacks since COVID, and we've had a lot of struggles, and we've been so desperately understaffed for so long. Really, there is no opportunity to talk about anything else until that structure's fixed, and until we've rebuilt to the point where we were. 2019 was the year that we focused specifically on building structure internally, and 2020 was our year to let that structure start to gain the experience of opening a few properties. We were meant to open 6 places in 2020 with the idea that 2021 and 2022 would then be letting that structure run. Honestly, the next year is really about rebuilding that structure, rebuilding the foundation to do what we currently have open well, and then building it with the idea of going back to that 2020 growth plan. Right now, it's rebuilding.
Handful of more questions for you. We ask these to everybody who comes on the podcast. So we always get a nice compare and contrast. You get a couple extra ones because you're a chef and sommelier and restaurant owner. But before that, I always have a previous guest leave behind a question for the next guest. So Chef Zach Wiener of Jollity restaurant in Dayton, Ohio was the previous guest. And the question he left behind was, if you had to choose one person to teach your parents how to cook professionally, who would it be?
Me. My mom taught me how to cook professionally, so I don't know that I guess all I could really offer to her is efficiency, but yeah.
What's a question you want to leave behind for the next guest? It can be anything.
What was the last meal you cooked for yourself, and what made it special?
Next question comes from one of our listeners. They wrote in, when you look back at your career, all the awards, honors, accolades, and everything, is there one that you kind of look at that you're most proud of? Whether it's becoming a master som or, winning a competition or getting the mobile, 5-star award at a property.
While it may not be an award, I'd say the thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that we've been able to continue to be employers through all of the ups and downs of the last 8 years. Award in particular and specific, is probably when we got when our first place got into Relais and Chateau, when the Unit dos Brijas got accepted into Relais and Chateau, was probably the biggest achievement at the time for us, and really kind of set us up with the idea that anything could be achieved. That was probably a big one for me.
Who would you say is the biggest influence on your career looking back at it so far?
Aside from my parents, who, taught me how to cook and taught me resilience and taught me how to work and taught me how to always do. Professionally, I would say it was probably Craig Hartman from the Barbecue Exchange in Virginia. I worked with him. He was the chef at the Statler when I was there during college, and it's just been a huge inspiration then and ever since.
What's one kitchen item that's not a knife that you can't live without?
Hand blender.
One thing in a restaurant that you would not fix yourself if it breaks?
I don't think there is anything at this point.
For most people, it's usually gas or electrical related, I feel like.
Nope. I've learned both of those over the last 7 years. What's the one thing I really don't like dealing with? Sewage. Toilets are probably the one thing I'd really rather not deal with.
What is your desert island wine?
German Riesling. Sweet German Riesling. Or semi-dry. Old school cabinet German Riesling.
Restaurant that you'd recommend that isn't your own. So scenario I usually give is, person gets stuck at the airport, nearest airport to the Finger Lakes there. You guys aren't open. You guys are closed, and they reach out to you and, hey, where should I go eat? You point them in this direction.
Hand and foot. Just rock and booze selection. Great bourbon, great whiskey, great mezcal, great sherry, good cocktails. Hand and foot.
Bucket list travel destination and bucket list restaurant. So is there any place that you haven't traveled to that you still want to go to, and any restaurant that you've never eaten at that is still high up on the list that you want to get to one day?
I've never been to Greece, and I want to go to Greece so badly for a wine producing destination. For other destinations, it is probably rural Japan, real northern, real southern Japan, outside of commercial centers. Destination restaurant. I don't really know where I want to go anymore. I stopped really ever wanting to do fine dining anymore. I don't have the patience for it. I don't like sitting there that long. So I don't tend to do much of that. I don't know. I mostly just really like simple things and going places with friends and people I want to see. So I don't have a restaurant off the top of my head that I'm dying to get to that I've never been. Got lots that I've been to that I want to go back to. But
craziest thing you've seen happen in a restaurant while you were working?
There's a lot of crazy things I've seen happen. Most of them are pretty gross, pretty graphic.
Chris had a pretty graphic a story for us, so feel free to fire away. There's, like I said, there's no restrictions here.
Maybe one of the stranger things that I've ever seen happen was at a property I ran, where we had some guests arrive, and I give them a little wine class, and my wine classes weren't big pours, so it was a very controlled amount of wine that they had. Shouldn't have been a problem for anybody. And they went back to their rooms for a little while and came back for dinner not long after. Didn't really have anything to drink. When they came back, seemed fine. Started them off with their tasting menu and their wine pairings. We were maybe 2.5 pairings in when the young lady went face down in her soup and The gentleman didn't seem to really have any concerns or cares. Got her up and out of her soup and cleaned up a little bit. She proceeded to start throwing up at the table, to which the gentleman just kept going, just kept eating. Everybody around her was getting uncomfortable. So I helped her to the restroom. He just kept asking for the next course. It's like, I think, should we stop this dining experience? He's like, no, you can just keep bringing it. Okay. So I took this young lady to the restroom and helped her get cleaned up. And clearly, obviously, we stopped pouring for her. And he just kept going. And he was a doctor, by the way, as well. And finally, I had to say, listen, I'm sorry, but your dining experience here is over. I'm going to need to call some medical attention if something's happening here. And he didn't seem concerned at all. He's like, it's fine. I'm a doctor. She's fine. Okay. She just needs to, get some sleep and sleep it off. Okay. So they went back to their room, and about a half an hour later, he called me to let me know that they were going to be leaving the property because we had a gated entrance. And I was like, okay, is everything all right? And he's like, yeah, she forgot something at the house. I'm going to go back and get it. Okay. Or he left. And about 6 hours passed. My wife and I are sitting there going, did he kill her? Like, is that what happened? Did he poison her and then take her back and just leave her and go? And it's about 2 a.m. and he still hasn't come back. And we're really worried. So we went over to check on her, and I'm knocking on the door saying, ma'am, I need to hear your voice. Ma'am, if you don't answer, I'm going to have to open this door. All of a sudden, the curtain flies open, and there she is going, what do you want? I was like, you okay? Just want to check in. Just want to make sure you're okay. And we get back to our house / the office, and phone's ringing like crazy. And he's at the gate, and he's pissed off because he's been at the gate for 5 minutes. Like, he must have gotten there right as we left to go check on her. And so we let him in, and next morning acted like nothing ever happened. I have no idea what happened, but everybody was fine. Everybody lived. So that's probably one of the weirder things, was trying to explain that to the guests around them at dinner. Strange people, strange things.
Food or drink guilty pleasures, or anything that is terrible for you, fast food, candy, whatever, that you just can't help yourself?
I think like McDonald's and Burger King are really delicious, but I've managed to not eat them for probably 15 years. So my opinion might have changed now. I would say maybe my guiltiest pleasure that I partake in is my love of Lindemann's Framboise, which I think is absolutely one of the most delicious beers on earth. Yeah, I think that's probably my worst. Maybe Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Haven't had one in years, but man, when they're around, they're irresistible to me.
Wine recommendations. So for everybody listening, so we kind of broke this down into just 4 different categories that we always ask for. Give the Som an opportunity to kind of point out some different regions and different things that they're excited about.
Drink more, share it.
So $20 and under, $50 and under for a bottle, $100 and under, and then over $100, no limit. Like, what would you recommend? What would you point out to somebody?
Jeez. Do they like white wine or red wine?
They like whatever. They're just this blank slate.
Under $20. Castello Verduno's Hella Verga, light red wine from Piedmont lately. Of course, if we were talking about white wine, I'd have to suggest Muscadet. Under $50. I really like some Chablis. Moreau Nowadays, like entry-level stuff, comes in under 50 and is really friggin' delicious. Sebastian Dauvissat, I love their wines, and I think they fall into that category. I think they're old school, like classic, slightly dirty Chablis. I love it. You know what I'm drinking for under $50? If I can find it, all day, every day, I'm drinking Faury Saint-Joseph Via Vine. If I can find it. If I can't, entry-level Saint-Joseph from Faury is amazing. $100, I want to drink Bernard Levet's Côte Rôtie all day, every day. I love that wine. I can have anything I want, like anything. I want El Maestro de Sierra's 1 in 7 Oloroso. Or I want really old Napa Cab from Ridge, Dunn, Mondavi Reserve, Martha's Vineyard.
Favorite Instagram account you follow?
There's so many different favorites for different reasons. I really like, there's a brewery, I think it's called Bearded Iris, and I really like their Instagram account because every single one of their beer promotion photos makes me want to drink that beer, even if I know I'm not going to like it. Like, they do really good job at their photography with their beers. Every time I see it, I want to drink one.
Favorite dish, thing you ever cooked, created? If you kind of look back through your career, especially the cooking side of things, you would kind of point to this dish as your aha moment, like you knew you could be a professional chef.
I don't know that I've had it yet. I mean, I guess back in the day, I really like my favorite things that I would do at home was a lot of like baking. It was cakes, croissants. Like I started making those when I was really young. So croissants I really liked. Pretzels. Like that was probably it when I was a kid.
I'm an Anthony Bourdain fan. Not everybody is. If you were, is there a moment, episode, scene about him that stands out to you the most? Or if you weren't, was there another kind of culinary professional that was on TV, Emerald, Jacques Pepin, anybody that you kind of gravitated towards while you were coming up through your career?
Not really. I mean, I didn't pay much attention to most of that. I remember the old Yan Can Cook shows, but I think maybe more important for me was the joy of cooking books than anything else. And when it came to like professional chefs who I obsessively followed for a really long time, say it was Thomas Keller and probably Heston Blumenthal at different phases of my life and interest.
Where can people find you? Social media, websites, reservations, plug everything.
Mostly fixing things under sinks. You could find me at Sommelier Bates on the social medias, on the internets at F.L.X.hospitality.com, elementwinery.com, or colloquialwines.com. You can find me via email on any of those websites. You can hit me up on Instagram. I don't use any of the others anymore. So I'm on the Instagram, and hopefully I won't be for long.
This is awesome. I appreciate you taking the time out to do this and coming on the podcast, the first master sommelier that we've had on. But more importantly, like you said, a restaurant owner and an employer for a region that is a budding tourist destination, I think is kind of where they strive to be. So we haven't been to the Finger Lakes yet, but definitely want to get out there and try some of the food and the wines and stuff that you guys are doing for sure. So hopefully, maybe, sometime this fall, be able to kind of venture out there. We're not too far away. I think it's only like a 4 or 5 hour drive. Like, it's not bad.
Come anytime. And if you see Mr. Dillman around your area, say hello for me. Absolutely miss him. And thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
A big thanks again to Christopher Bates for coming on the podcast, taking some time out of his morning to chat about his wine career, chef career, his restaurant owner career, winemaking career. So again, you can follow him at Sommelier Bates, also at F.L.X. Hospitality. And then there's a whole bunch of different offshoot accounts for all the restaurants, the winery, Element Wines, the brewery, Sour Beer Arm, F.L.X. Culture House. So if you go to his Instagram page or the hospitality Instagram page, in the little bio section, that'll kind of give you all the links to follow all those. So make sure to check them out. They got a bunch of different concepts kind of spread around that area. Haven't made it to that area myself, but definitely want to go and check out and see what they have. You can also order wine from them too that they produce that they'll ship to your door. So definitely check out everything that they have to offer. I know Kendi Warden of the Grape Grind recently went out to that kind of region a couple months back and was posting pictures and stuff too as well. So it looks like a pretty cool spot, especially if you love Riesling, which is a prominent wine there in that region. So make sure to follow us on Instagram at Spoon Mob. Subscribe to the podcast, whatever podcast platform you listen to podcasts. We're on all of them. Check out the website. Feel free to email us or drop a question, comment, anything in the little contact box, contact page on the website there. But that is it for this week. We will talk to you guys next week.